A senior pediatric nurse was ripped from her vehicle, mocked, and handed crippling fines by two corrupt officers who thought she was just another easy target. They assumed she had no voice. They assumed she had no power. They were dead wrong. What these officers didn't know was that her only son was a decorated captain in the Airborne Special Forces, and when he saw the body cam footage of his mother weeping on the pavement, he didn't just get mad, he got tactical. Elena Harper gripped the worn leather of her steering wheel, her knuckles aching with the familiar dull throb of arthritis. Working a double shift at Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital's pediatric ward was enough to drain the life out of anyone, but Elena did it with a quiet, unyielding grace. She had spent decades wiping the tears of sick children and comforting terrified parents. She was a pillar of her community, a woman who paid her taxes, attended church every Sunday, and had single-handedly raised a son she was fiercely proud of. Her route home took her through Pine Valley, an affluent, predominantly white suburb tucked away in the rolling hills of North Carolina. It was a shortcut that saved her time on the interstate. The streets here were lined with manicured oak trees and sprawling estates hidden behind wrought iron gates. Elena drove just under the posted limit, her eyes fixed on the rain-slicked asphalt. Then the darkness of the quiet street was shattered by a blinding burst of red and blue lights. Elena's heart skipped a beat. A siren let out a sharp, aggressive chirp. She checked her speedometer. She was well within the limit. She checked her mirrors. There was nowhere to pull over on the narrow shoulder, so she activated her blinker, slowly turning into the brightly lit parking lot of a closed community center. She put the car in park, turned off the engine, and rolled down her window, her hands resting visibly on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 positions, just like she had taught her son to do years ago. The heavy thud of boots approached her driver's side door. Two figures emerged from the glare of the police cruiser's high beams. Officer Derek Harlan was a heavily built man in his late 20s, with a buzz cut and a perpetual sneer, known around the precinct for his aggressive arrest record. His partner, Officer Victor Lang, was older, lean, and possessed a quiet, cold indifference that was somehow more terrifying than Harlan's overt hostility. "License and registration," Harlan barked, not bothering with a greeting. He flashed his heavy maglite directly into Elena's eyes, blinding her. "Good evening, officer," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to remain calm. She squinted against the harsh beam. "My license is in my purse on the passenger seat. I'm going to reach for it now." "I didn't ask for a narration. Just hand over the cards," Harlan snapped, his hand resting casually on the butt of his service weapon. Elena carefully handed over her documents. Harlan snatched them from her fingers, looking at her Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital badge hanging from her scrubs. He scoffed. "You were a janitor over at the hospital, Elena." The disrespect stung, but Elena kept her eyes forward. "I'm a senior pediatric nurse, officer." Lang leaned down, peering into the back seat of her Malibu. "What are you doing in this neighborhood at this hour, Elena? You're a long way from the south side." "I'm driving home from a long shift," she explained softly. "This is the fastest route to my house." Harlan let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Sure it is. We've had a lot of burglaries in Pine Valley recently. People cruising through casing houses. Your car matches the description of a suspicious vehicle." "It's a silver Chevy Malibu, officer. There are thousands of them," Elena said, her patience fraying just a fraction. "And I was driving under the speed limit." "Are you arguing with me?" Harlan's voice dropped an octave, dripping with malice. "Step out of the vehicle." "What? Why?" Elena's breath hitched. "I haven't done anything wrong." "I said step out of the vehicle," Harlan roared, pulling the door handle and yanking the heavy metal door open. "Get out now, or I will remove you for resisting." Terrified, Elena unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out into the freezing night air. Her knees popped as she stood. She was wearing only her thin cotton scrubs, and the night chill immediately bit into her bones. "Go sit on the curb," Lang ordered, pointing to the wet concrete. "Please, the ground is freezing. I have arthritis." "Sit on the curb or we'll put you in the back of the cruiser in cuffs," Harlan interrupted. Humiliated, Elena walked to the curb and sat down on the cold, wet cement. She wrapped her arms around her thin frame, shivering violently as she watched Harlan and Lang proceed to tear her car apart. They opened her glove box, tossing her registration papers and old receipts onto the floorboards. They opened her trunk, pulling out her emergency medical kit and dumping the contents onto the pavement. Bandages, saline solution, and sterile wipes scattered across the wet asphalt. They kept her on that curb for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Harlan sauntered over with a thick stack of yellow citations in his hand. He tossed them onto her lap. They fluttered down, landing on her wet scrubs. Failure to maintain a lane, suspicious behavior, defective taillight. Harlan listed off, smirking. And a warning for impeding a police investigation. You're looking at about $1,200 in fines. I suggest you find a different route home from your nursing job from now on. People around here don't like it when your kind goes prowling through their streets. They got into their cruiser and sped off, leaving Elena sitting alone in the cold. She slowly gathered her scattered medical supplies with numb, trembling fingers. When she finally got back into the driver's seat, she gripped the steering wheel, buried her face in her hands, and wept. It wasn't just the money, though $1,200 was a devastating blow to her finances. It was the complete, utter stripping of her dignity. She felt utterly powerless. But Elena Harper was not powerless. She just hadn't made a phone call yet. Shortly after, the heavy hum of a C-17 Globemaster echoed across the tarmac of Fort Liberty. Captain Julian Harper stepped off the ramp, the North Carolina sun beating down on his tan beret. In his early 30s, Julian was a seasoned veteran of the 82nd Airborne Division, holding a green beret and possessing a chest full of commendations from classified deployments in the Middle East. He was a master of asymmetrical warfare, a man trained to analyze complex, hostile environments and dismantle them piece by piece. He was broad-shouldered, standing 6'2" with a calm that made him a natural leader. As he loaded his duffel bag into his Jeep Wrangler, he pulled out his personal cell phone. He had been off the grid for several weeks. There were 4 missed calls, all from his mother. Frowning, Julian hit the voicemail button. The first 2 messages were standard check-ins, telling him she loved him. The third message was empty, just the sound of ragged breathing. The fourth message, left 2 nights earlier, made Julian's blood run ice cold. It was Elena, and she was crying. "Julian, honey, I'm sorry to bother you. I know you're busy serving our country, but I was pulled over tonight. The police in Pine Valley. They took my things apart. They made me sit in the cold. They said some terrible things to me. I'm just so scared, Julian. I don't know how I'm going to pay these tickets. Please call me when you get home." Julian didn't go to his barracks. He didn't drop off his gear. He put the Jeep in drive and sped directly to his mother's small, meticulously kept home on the south side of town. When he walked through the front door, the smell of freshly baked cornbread greeted him. But the atmosphere in the house was heavy. He found Elena sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a stack of yellow citations. When she looked up and saw her son in his fatigues, she broke down again. Julian held her as she cried, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with a cold, focused fury. He listened in silence as she recounted every detail of the ordeal, the mockery of her profession, the illegal search of her vehicle, the explicit threat Harlan had made about her kind prowling the streets. "I tried to be polite, Julian," she whispered, wiping her eyes. "I did everything you taught me to do. Hands on the wheel, polite answers. But they looked at me like I was dirt." Julian gently picked up the citations. He read the names at the bottom. Officer Derek Harlan, Officer Victor Lang. "You didn't do anything wrong, Mom," Julian said softly, his voice dangerously calm. "They picked the wrong target." "Julian, please," Elena said, grabbing his wrist. "Don't go down to the station causing trouble. They have badges. They have guns. They'll ruin your career or worse. Just let me pay the fines. I'll pick up some extra shifts." "You aren't paying a dime, Mom," Julian replied. "And I'm not going to cause a scene. That's not how I operate." Julian kissed her forehead, took photos of the citations, and walked out to his Jeep. He didn't drive to the police precinct to yell at a desk sergeant. Unfocused rage was a liability. He needed intelligence. He needed a dossier. He drove to a local coffee shop and opened his encrypted laptop. He made a call to a friend from his unit, Chief Warrant Officer Elias Thorne, a cybersecurity and intelligence analyst who lived for digging up buried secrets. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Cap." Thorne's voice crackled over the line. "What do you need?" "I need you to pull the public traffic stop records for the Pine Valley precinct over the last 24 months, Julian ordered. "Specifically, I want the citation history for 2 officers, Derek Harlan and Victor Lang. Filter the data by the race and age of the drivers they've pulled over. Cross-reference it with the outcomes in court." "Give me 10 minutes, Thorne said, hearing the deadly, serious tone in Julian's voice. 15 minutes later, a secure file dropped into Julian's inbox. The data was damning. Over the past 2 years, Harlan and Lang had issued over 400 traffic citations. 85% of those citations were handed to Black and Hispanic drivers passing through the Pine Valley corridor late at night. Almost all of them were for ambiguous infractions: failure to maintain lane, suspicious behavior, or defective equipment. "Look at the court records, Cap," Thorne said over the phone. 90% of these tickets are dismissed if the driver actually shows up to court with a lawyer. But most of these people are working class. They can't afford a lawyer or the time off work, so they just pay the fines to avoid a bench warrant. The precinct uses these 2 as a revenue generator. It's an extortion racket. "Master's traffic enforcement," Julian murmured, his eyes scanning the spreadsheet. "And they're targeting people they think won't fight back." "Yeah, they're bullies with badges," Thorne agreed. "What's the play here, Julian? You want me to leak this to the press? Data is easy to spin. The police union will just claim these are high-crime areas, and the officers are being proactive," Julian said, closing his laptop. "To break a corrupt system, you don't just show them the numbers. You catch them in the act. You make it undeniable." "You're going undercover," Thorne guessed. "I'm going for a drive," Julian corrected. "I need your help wiring a vehicle, full audio and video. I want live telemetry, multiple angles, and a direct cloud uplink that they can't smash." "I've got some surplus micro cameras from our last deployment," Thorne said, the excitement evident in his voice. "When are we doing this?" "Tonight," Julian said. "They like the dark. Let's see how they handle the spotlight." Late that night, Elena's silver Chevy Malibu had been transformed into a rolling surveillance hub. Working in the privacy of a rented garage, Thorne had seamlessly integrated 4 high-definition micro cameras into the vehicle. One was hidden in the rearview mirror, capturing the entire front windshield and the hood. Another was embedded in the driver's side door panel, angled perfectly to catch the face of anyone standing outside the window. A third monitored the interior, and a fourth was tucked into the rear license plate frame. Every camera was hardwired into a concealed transmitter under the passenger seat, streaming the feed directly to an encrypted cloud server and to Thorne's laptop, which he had set up in the back of an unmarked van parked a mile away. Julian stripped off his military uniform and dressed the part of the target they were looking for. He put on a faded, oversized black hoodie, a dark beanie pulled low over his forehead, and a pair of old jeans. He left his military ID, his concealed carry weapon, and his wallet at the garage. The only identification he carried was a standard North Carolina driver's license. "Comms check." Thorne's voice buzzed in a microscopic earpiece tucked deep into Julian's right ear. "Copy, you clear, Connor." "Elias," Julian replied softly. "Streaming is green. Audio is crystal. The bait is set, Captain. Happy hunting." In the early hours, Julian turned onto Pine Valley Road. The rain from nights earlier had cleared, leaving the air crisp and cold. He drove with mechanical precision, his speedometer locked just under the limit. He kept his hands relaxed on the steering wheel, his breathing slow and measured. entering the same tactical headspace he used before a night raid. He drove for 10 minutes. Nothing. He looped around and drove the corridor again. As he passed the stone pillars of the Pine Valley Country Club, a shadow detached itself from the darkness of a side street. A police cruiser. It pulled out, tailing him. "Target acquired," Thorne murmured in the earpiece. "That's Unit 44. It's them. Harlan and Lang." Julian didn't react. He maintained his speed. He made sure to keep perfectly centered in his lane. He approached a stop sign, came to a complete 3-second halt, and used his blinker before turning right. He was giving them absolutely zero probable cause. It didn't matter. 3 blocks later, the cruiser's overhead lights flared to life, casting a harsh strobe-like glare into the cabin of the Malibu. The siren let out a demanding wail. Julian calmly activated his blinker, pulled over to the side of the road under the glow of a streetlight, and shifted the car into park. He rolled down all 4 windows, a tactical move to ensure audio was captured clearly from all directions, and placed his hands firmly on the steering wheel. In the side mirror, he watched Harlan and Lang step out of their cruiser. They moved with the casual, arrogant swagger of men who believed they owned the night. Harlan approached the driver's side, shining his heavy flashlight directly into Julian's face. Lang hung back near the rear quarter panel, hand resting on his holster. "Well, well, well," Harlan drawled, leaning down toward the window. "What do we have here? License and registration, boy." Julian didn't flinch at the derogatory term. He kept his eyes forward. "Good evening, officer. My license and registration are in the center console. I'm going to reach for them slowly." "I didn't ask for a speech," Harlan snapped instantly, escalating his tone, following the exact same playbook he had used on Elena. "Just give me the paperwork." Onaha. Julian slowly opened the console, retrieved the documents, and handed them out the window. Harlan snatched them, glancing at the name. "Julian Harper. This is your car, Julian?" "It belongs to my mother," Julian replied evenly. Harlan let out a harsh laugh. "Driving Mommy's car through Pine Valley at this hour. Let me guess. You're just on your way home from church." "I'm driving home," Julian said. "Could you tell me why I was pulled over, officer?" Harlan slammed his hand against the roof of the Malibu, a loud, aggressive bang meant to trigger a flinch. Julian didn't even blink. "I'll ask the questions here," Harlan snarled, leaning his face closer to the window. "You were swerving all over the road. You smell like marijuana, Julian. You got drugs in the car?" "No, officer. I don't use drugs, and I was maintaining my lane perfectly. Are you calling me a liar?" Harlan's hand dropped to his duty belt. "Step out of the vehicle, now." "Officer, under Pennsylvania versus Mims, you have the right to order me out of the vehicle," Julian said, his voice terrifyingly calm, citing the Supreme Court case law with zero hesitation. "However, I am formally stating that I do not consent to any searches of my person or my vehicle. You do not have probable cause." Harlan froze for a fraction of a second, clearly caught off guard by the legal precision of the response. Then his face flushed with anger. "Oh, we got a roadside lawyer here, Victor," he called out to his partner. Harlan grabbed the door handle and yanked it open. "Get out of the car before I drag you out." Julian unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out into the street. He stood up to his full height of 6'2". Harlan, who was used to intimidating people, suddenly found himself having to look up slightly. The dynamic shifted just a fraction, but Julian felt it. "Hands on the hood," Harlan ordered, pulling out his handcuffs. "Am I being detained or am I free to go?" Julian asked, making sure the hidden door camera captured Harlan's face perfectly. "You're being detained for suspicion of driving under the influence and resisting an investigation," Lang chimed in, stepping forward. "Now, put your hands on the hood." Julian complied slowly, placing his hands on the cold metal of the Malibu. Harlan aggressively patted him down, digging his hands roughly into Julian's pockets, finding nothing but lint. "Where are the drugs, Harper?" Harlan whispered harshly in his ear. "We know why people like you cruise through these neighborhoods, looking for packages on porches, looking for unlocked cars. You think you're smart reciting laws to me. I am the law out here. I have not committed a crime, Julian said, his voice ringing clearly into the hidden microphones. You pulled over this vehicle 3 nights ago. The driver was a senior pediatric nurse named Elena Harper. You forced her to sit on the freezing curb while you illegally tore her car apart, and then you extorted her with fraudulent tickets. Harlan stopped his search. Lang took a step back, his hand tightening on his weapon. The silence on the dark street was suddenly deafening. You're the nurse's kid, Harlan said, a nasty grin spreading across his face. So what? She came crying to you and you decided to come out here and play hero. What are you going to do, boy? File a complaint? Nobody down at the station cares what you or your mommy have to say. I'm not going to file a complaint, Julian said, turning his head slowly to look Harlan dead in the eyes. The absolute lack of fear in Julian's gaze finally made a crack in the officer's arrogant facade. Then what are you doing here? Harlan demanded, suddenly feeling very exposed under the streetlights. I'm gathering intelligence, Julian replied softly. Cap? Thorne's voice buzzed in the earpiece. We have everything. 3 angles of civil rights violations, illegal detention, and verbal admission of harassment. The package is compiled. Send it. Julian whispered aloud. Who are you talking to? Lang asked, stepping forward, drawing his taser. Are you on a wire? Send what? Harlan demanded, grabbing Julian by the shoulder. Julian turned around completely casually, brushing Harlan's hand off his shoulder with a fluid Marshall block that left the officer stunned. As of 30 seconds ago, Julian said, his voice echoing in the quiet night. A high-definition multi-angle video of this entire interaction, along with your complete unconstitutional harassment of my mother, has been securely emailed to the district attorney, the FBI field office in Raleigh, and the news desk of every major television station in North Carolina. Son, Harlan paled. You're bluffing. Check your dash cam, Officer Harlan, Julian said smoothly. Check your body cam, then check mine. Julian pointed a finger to the rearview mirror, then to the door panel, and finally to the button of his own hoodie, where a 5th microlens was hidden. You just ended your own careers, and the best part, you did it all on tape. The heavy silence on the rain-slicked asphalt of Pine Valley Road was shattered only by the low rumble of the police cruiser's engine. Officer Derek Harlan stared at Julian, his mouth slightly open. The arrogant sneer was entirely wiped from his face. For the first time in his career, the badge pinned to his chest felt like a target rather than a shield. You're lying, Harlan stammered, though his voice lacked its previous thunder. He took a frantic step toward the Malibu, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. There's no way you wired this piece of junk. Touch that vehicle, and you're tampering with evidence in an active federal civil rights investigation, Julian said, his voice slicing through the cold air with absolute authority. The footage is already out of your jurisdiction. It's sitting in a secure cloud server, and a copy just hit the inbox of the Raleigh FBI field office. Victor Lang, usually the quiet enforcer, began to panic. He holstered his taser, his hands visibly shaking. Derek, back up. Derek, let's just get in the cruiser. But Harlan's fear violently mutated into primal, desperate rage. He realized his pension, his freedom, and his power were evaporating in real time. With a guttural shout, Harlan lunged at Julian, reaching for the collar of the black hoodie to throw the much larger man to the pavement. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Julian didn't throw a punch. He didn't need to. Decades of close-quarters combat training took over. As Harlan lunged, Julian simply pivoted on his heel, stepping offline and completely removing himself from the officer's path. He caught Harlan's extended wrist, used the officer's own forward momentum against him, and smoothly redirected him straight into the side of the police cruiser. Harlan slammed face first into the reinforced steel door of his own vehicle with a heavy thud. The wind knocked out of his lungs. Julian maintained control of Harlan's wrist, pinning it firmly behind the officer's back in a joint lock that applied just enough pressure to paralyze him with pain, but not enough to break the bone. Lang instantly reached for his service weapon. "Let him go. I'll shoot." "Draw that weapon, Lang, and you will be answering to the Department of Defense," Julian barked, his voice echoing with command presence. He didn't break eye contact with the trembling partner. "My name is Captain Julian Harper, United States Army Special Forces. You are currently attempting to unlawfully assault an active-duty military officer. The cameras are rolling. Your body cams are rolling. If you unholster that firearm, your next stop is a federal penitentiary." Lang froze, his hand hovering over the Kydex holster. The sheer tactical dominance radiating from Julian paralyzed him. This wasn't a scared civilian. This was a predator who had allowed them to step into his cage. Julian released Harlan's wrist and took a deliberate step back, raising his hands openly to show he was not a threat. "Get in your car, turn off your lights, and drive away." Harlan stumbled back, gasping for air, clutching his wrist. He looked at the Malibu, spotting the tiny glittering lens embedded in the doorframe. The reality of the trap finally set in. He was caught. Without another word, Harlan shoved past Lang, threw himself into the driver's seat of the cruiser, and slammed the door. Lang scrambled into the passenger side. The red and blue lights abruptly shut off, plunging the street back into darkness. The cruiser's tires squealed against the wet asphalt as they sped away, abandoning their extortion attempt in sheer terror. "Elias," Julian said, calmly touching his earpiece. "Threat has retreated. Did you get the physical altercation?" "Got every frame, Cap," Thorne replied, his voice buzzing with adrenaline over the comms. "It was beautiful. Harlan practically assaulted a brick wall. The footage is already compiling. The DA's office opens in a few hours. It's going to be a bloodbath." Early the next morning, Elena Harper was sitting in her kitchen nursing a cup of black coffee. She looked exhausted, dreading the upcoming legal battle over her fraudulent tickets. Then her smartphone buzzed. It was a text from a fellow nurse at Oak Ridge Memorial. "Elena, turn on Channel 8 right now." Elena grabbed the remote and flicked on the small television sitting on her kitchen counter. The morning news anchor, Lena Brooks, was looking gravely into the camera. "Breaking news this morning out of the Pine Valley precinct," the anchor announced. "A shocking video has surfaced overnight exposing what appears to be a systemic pattern of racial profiling, extortion, and civil rights violations by local officers. The footage captured by an undercover military officer whose mother was allegedly targeted earlier this week is highly disturbing." The screen cut to the crystal-clear multi-angle footage of Julian's traffic stop. It showed Harlan's aggressive swagger, the illegal demands, and the explicit threats. Then the station played the audio of Julian dismantling the officers with calm, legal precision. They even showed the dashcam footage leaked directly to the press by Thorne of Elena, sitting freezing on the curb nights earlier. Tears welled up in Elena's eyes. She covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. She wasn't invisible anymore. The front door opened and Julian walked in, carrying a box of fresh pastries from a local bakery. He looked exhausted but entirely at peace. He set the box on the table and wrapped his arms around his mother. "It's over, Mom," he whispered. "They can't hurt you anymore." But Julian knew the truth about corrupt systems. Exposing the foot soldiers was only step one. The men pulling the strings were about to strike back. By midday, the Pine Valley precinct was under siege. News vans clogged the streets outside the station. Protesters outraged by the undeniable footage of Elena shivering on the curb had gathered with signs demanding immediate terminations. The mayor's office issued a panicked, generic statement, promising a thorough internal review. But behind closed doors, the police union and the department brass were orchestrating a counteroffensive. They weren't going to let an outsider, even a Green Beret, humiliate them and destroy their most lucrative policing corridor. That afternoon, an unmarked black SUV parked aggressively at the end of Elena's driveway. Two men in sharp suits stepped out. They didn't look like standard detectives. They moved with the heavy, intimidating gait of internal affairs fixers. Julian watched them from the living room window, pulling the curtain back just an inch. "Stay in the kitchen, Mom," he said quietly. He unlocked the front door and stepped out onto the porch, crossing his arms over his broad chest. The older of the two men, a heavy-set man with a thick gray mustache, flashed a gold badge. "Captain Harper, I'm Deputy Chief Harlan Crow. This is Union Representative Silas Grant. We'd like a word with your mother." "My mother is resting," Julian replied, his voice an impenetrable wall of calm. "If you have questions regarding the civil rights lawsuit my attorneys are currently drafting, you can direct them to my legal counsel." "Let's not make this uglier than it has to be, son," Crow said, his tone dripping with patronizing faux sympathy. He took a step closer to the porch stairs. "What happened to your mother was regrettable, a misunderstanding by two overzealous rookies. But this media circus you've started, it's dangerous. It makes our officers look bad. It makes the city look bad." "Your officers made themselves look bad," Julian corrected without missing a beat. "I just provided the lighting." Union Rep Grant sneered. "Listen to me, soldier boy. Harlan and Lang are decorated officers. You manipulated a traffic stop. You provoked them. We have lawyers scrubbing that video right now to prove you illegally wiretapped a police investigation. You're looking at felony charges." Julian let out a low, humorous chuckle. "North Carolina is a one-party consent state for audio recording, Mr. Grant, and there is no expectation of privacy on a public roadway. You know that. I know that. So drop the intimidation tactics. It won't work on me." Crow held up a hand, playing the good cop. "Captain, we want to make this right. The precinct is willing to drop the citations against your mother. Completely voided. We'll even issue a formal apology from the department and put Harlan on a paid administrative leave while he undergoes retraining. In exchange, you release a statement saying you trust the department's internal process and you pull the FBI complaint." Julian stared at them. They were actually trying to buy him off with his mother's own stolen innocence. "You wanted to protect the system. Paid vacation for the men who tortured my mother," Julian summarized, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. "And you get to keep pulling over working-class minorities to fund your precinct." "It's a generous offer, Harper," Crow warned, his voice hardening. "Because the alternative is that your mother's life becomes very difficult. We have cruisers patrolling this neighborhood all day. It would be a shame if she started getting pulled over for broken taillights every time she tried to go to the grocery store. It would be a shame if her hospital got a tip that she was stealing narcotics from the pediatric ward. Things happen." Julian's blood ran cold. The threat was explicit. They were threatening to frame his mother. Julian took one slow, deliberate step down the porch stairs. Crow and Grant instinctively took a step back, suddenly hyper-aware of the physical danger standing in front of them. "Let me explain something to you, Deputy Chief," Julian said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. "I spent years hunting insurgents in the Korengal Valley. I know what an organized cartel looks like. You aren't law enforcement. You're a gang wearing taxpayer-funded suits." "Siu." Julian pulled his phone from his pocket and tapped a single button on the screen. Immediately, the deep guttural roar of heavy diesel engines echoed down the street. Crow and Grant turned around in confusion. Rolling down the quiet suburban street were four massive matte black Ford F-250 trucks. They moved in a synchronized tactical convoy. The trucks pulled up to the curb, boxing in the unmarked police SUV completely. The doors opened and out stepped 8 men. They were Julian's squad mates from Fort Liberty. They weren't in uniform. They wore civilian clothes, flannel shirts and jeans, but their military bearing was unmistakable. They stood around the perimeter of Elena's property, their arms crossed, staring silently at the 2 police officials. It was a profound, overwhelming show of force, executed with absolute silence. "You think you can intimidate my mother?" Julian whispered, stepping closer to Crow. "This property is now secured by elements of the United States Army Special Forces. If a single police cruiser so much as idles on this street, I will consider it a hostile act. If my mother is harassed at her workplace, I will dismantle this precinct brick by brick." Crow swallowed hard, the color draining from his face. He looked at the ring of silent, hardened operators surrounding his vehicle. "You're crazy," Grant muttered, completely losing his nerve. "I'm deeply focused," Julian corrected. "And I don't just want Harlan. I want the man who trained him. I want the man who ordered him to generate that revenue." Julian leaned in close to Crow's ear. "I know about the slush fund, Harlan. My intel guys tracked the ticket revenue. We know it doesn't go to the city road maintenance budget. It goes to a discretionary fund that you control. You've been stealing from the poorest citizens of this county to fund your own department's luxury vehicles and private security contracts." Crow's eyes widened in pure horror. The slush fund was buried under layers of municipal shell accounts. Nobody was supposed to know about it. "You have 24 hours to resign and turn state's evidence to the FBI," Julian said softly. "Or I release the financial data to the press tomorrow morning. Now get off my mother's property." Defeated, terrified, and completely outmaneuvered, Crow and Grant practically ran to their SUV. They had to ask the Special Forces operators to move their trucks just to back out. Julian watched them flee, his jaw set. The blue wall of silence hadn't just cracked. Julian had just blown it wide open with a shaped charge. But a cornered animal is the most dangerous, and Julian knew the corrupt brass would rather burn the city down than go to federal prison. The real war was just beginning. Deputy Chief Harlan Crow sat in his dimly lit office, his hands trembling violently as he poured 2 fingers of cheap bourbon into a glass. The amber liquid sloshed over the rim, staining the mahogany desk. It was late evening, just hours until Julian Harper's deadline expired. Crow's mind was racing, cycling through a desperate array of terrible options. The financial data Julian claimed to have was the holy grail of Pine Valley's corruption. For years, Crow had systematically diverted minor traffic fines, asset forfeitures, and municipal court fees into a phantom municipal account. It paid for off-the-books tactical gear, luxury retreats for senior officers, and personal kickbacks. If the FBI got their hands on the raw ledgers, it wouldn't just be a civil rights violation. It would be a federal racketeering case. Crow was looking at decades in a maximum security prison. The door to his office clicked open, and Officer Derek Harlan slipped inside, closing the blinds. Harlan looked like a ghost. He had been placed on indefinite unpaid leave that morning, his badge and gun stripped from him by the Internal Affairs desk. "You said you had a plan, boss," Harlan muttered, his voice raspy. He looked feral, like a cornered animal with absolutely nothing left to lose. "The union rep won't even return my calls. They're going to throw me to the wolves to save themselves." "Shut up and listen, Derek," Crow snapped, downing the bourbon. "Harper is military. He thinks tactically, but he's arrogant. He bragged about having intel guys. That means he didn't hack our municipal servers himself. He has a tech operative running his digital footprint. I had our cyber unit run a trace on the email that sent the video file to the DA. Harlan's eyes widened. "Did you find him?" "They bounced the signal through a dozen proxies, but they made a mistake. They left a local IP ping open for a fraction of a second," Crow explained, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. "It traces back to an abandoned commercial garage on the industrial side of town. That's their nerve center. That's where the data is." Harlan stared at the address. The desperation in his eyes morphed into something deeply dangerous. "What do you want me to do? I don't have a badge anymore, Lawrence." "I don't need a cop tonight, Derek. I need a cleaner," Crow said coldly. "Take 3 of your most trusted guys, off the books. No uniforms, no cruisers. You go to that garage, you breach it, and you smash every server, every hard drive, and every laptop you find. You burn the physical evidence to ash. Without the hard drives, the financial hack is inadmissible in court. It's just hearsay." "And what if the soldier's there?" Harlan asked, swallowing hard, clearly remembering the paralyzing pain of Julian's joint lock. Then you do whatever it takes to ensure he doesn't leave, Crow ordered, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. You understand me. This is survival. In the early hours, the rain had returned, slicking the streets of the industrial district in a thick, reflective sheen. A blacked-out, unmarked Chevy Tahoe rolled to a silent stop a block away from the targeted garage. Harlan and 3 heavily armed, disgraced plainclothes officers stepped out into the downpour. They wore tactical vests over black hoodies, ski masks pulled down over their faces. They carried suppressed submachine guns and heavy breaching tools. They approached the rusted metal door of the garage in diamond formation. The area was dead silent save for the rhythmic drumming of rain on the aluminum roof. Harlan raised his hand, signaling the breacher. A massive man stepped forward with a heavy steel ram. With one vicious swing, the rusted deadbolt shattered. The door flew open, and the 4 men flooded into the dark cavernous space, weapons raised, sweeping the corners. Clear left, clear right. The garage was mostly empty, smelling of motor oil and damp concrete. But in the center of the room sat a folding table illuminated by the glow of 3 high-end computer monitors. Server racks hummed beneath the table, tiny green lights blinking in the darkness. We got the servers, Harlan whispered, a wave of dark relief washing over him. Smash it all. Pour the accelerant. His men rushed forward, raising their weapons to bash the monitors. Suddenly, a bright, blinding white spotlight snapped on from the ceiling, flooding the room and blinding the 4 rogue cops. Harlan shouted, throwing his hands over his eyes. Drop your weapons! Do it now! A voice boomed over a hidden PA system. It wasn't Julian's voice. Harlan blinked through the harsh light, his vision slowly adjusting. Standing at the far end of the garage, shielded behind a row of heavy bulletproof ballistic shields, were 12 heavily armed tactical agents wearing dark windbreakers. Stamped across the chest of every windbreaker in bold yellow letters were 3 terrifying initials: FBI. Before Harlan could even process the catastrophe, a side door opened and Captain Julian Harper walked in completely unarmed, his hands casually resting in the pockets of his jeans. Standing right beside him was Special Agent Victor Hale, the lead corruption investigator for the Raleigh field office. You really thought I would leave my entire digital infrastructure unguarded in a rented garage? Julian asked, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. He shook his head, looking at Harlan with absolute pity. I didn't make a mistake with the IP ping, Harlan. I left the door open on purpose. I needed to see if Crow was stupid enough to walk through it. Harlan's hands shook uncontrollably. The submachine gun felt like 1,000 pounds in his grip. Officer Derek Harlan, Agent Hale announced, his voice slicing through the tension like a scalpel. You and your men are currently participating in an armed burglary, destruction of evidence, and conspiracy to commit murder against a federal asset. If you do not drop those weapons in the next 3 seconds, you will be neutralized. The 3 men with Harlan didn't hesitate. The heavy clatter of their guns hitting the concrete floor echoed through the garage. They immediately dropped to their knees, lacing their fingers behind their heads. Harlan stood frozen, his chest heaving. The life he knew was over. The power he had abused was gone. He looked at Julian, the man who had completely dismantled his corrupt empire in less than 48 hours. With a sob of pure defeat, Harlan dropped his weapon and fell to his knees. Julian turned to Agent Hale. You have the audio recording of Crow ordering the hit? We tapped Crow's office phone and office bugs the second you gave us the financial ledgers yesterday morning, Hale confirmed, holstering his weapon as his tactical team moved in to cuff the rogue cops. Crow ordered the destruction of evidence and authorized lethal force. We have everything we need to bypass the Union completely. Good, Julian said, turning on his heel. Let's go wake up the deputy chief. At dawn, the sun was just beginning to peek over the affluent hills of Pine Valley. Deputy Chief Harlan Crow was asleep in his sprawling 5-bedroom estate, dreaming of a clean slate. He had turned his phone off, assuming Harlan had handled the problem. His peaceful sleep was violently interrupted by the deafening sound of his solid oak front door being battered off its hinges. Crow bolted upright in bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. Heavy boots thundered up the carpeted staircase. Before he could even reach for the revolver in his nightstand, the bedroom door burst open. "Federal Bureau of Investigation! Hands in the air! Do not move!" Crow was ripped from his expensive mattress, thrown face down onto the floor, and handcuffed in only his pajamas. As he was dragged down the stairs and out onto his manicured lawn, the entire neighborhood was watching. The flashing red and blue lights of federal vehicles illuminated the early morning fog. Standing on the sidewalk, leaning casually against his Jeep Wrangler, was Julian Harper. Crow locked eyes with the Green Beret. All the arrogance, the threats, and the political power Crow had wielded for decades had been utterly dismantled by a son protecting his mother. Julian didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just gave Crow a single, slow nod of finality as the disgraced officer was shoved into the back of an armored transport. The ensuing fallout was a tactical masterclass in dismantling systemic corruption. By midday, the mayor of Pine Valley held an emergency press conference, flanked by the newly appointed interim police chief and Agent Hale. They announced the immediate termination and federal indictment of Harlan Crow, Derek Harlan, Victor Lang, and 14 other officers implicated in the slush fund conspiracy. The precinct was placed under federal oversight. But for Julian, the real victory didn't happen in a press conference. It happened in Municipal Courtroom B. That afternoon, Elena Harper walked into the courthouse wearing her Sunday best. She was no longer trembling. She walked with her head held high, her son's hand resting gently on her shoulder. The courtroom was packed, but it was entirely silent as Elena approached the defendant's table. The presiding official, Judge Victor Hale, an older man with a stern reputation, looked down at the thick stack of yellow citations in front of him. He slowly pushed them aside. "Mrs. Harper," Judge Hale began, his voice echoing in the cavernous room, "I reviewed the footage of your traffic stop as well as the federal indictments handed down this morning. What you endured on that night was not policing. It was an assault on your dignity, your rights, and your humanity." Elena took a shaky breath, Julian giving her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "The officers who issued these citations relied on the assumption that you were vulnerable. They relied on the fact that the system is designed to exhaust good people into simply paying fines to make the harassment stop," Judge Hale continued, his tone resolute. "But they underestimated your strength, and they certainly underestimated the remarkable devotion of your son." The judge picked up his heavy wooden gavel. "All citations issued against Mrs. Elena Harper are hereby dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering the city of Pine Valley to reimburse all court fees, and I have recommended a full civil settlement be expedited for the trauma you endured. You are a nurse who has spent her life caring for our community. Today, the community failed you, but the justice system will not. You are free to go, ma'am." The slam of the gavel echoed like a gunshot. Elena turned to Julian, tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of profound relief. She threw her arms around her towering, battle-hardened son, burying her face in his chest. The courtroom erupted into spontaneous applause, the gallery standing to their feet to honor the woman who had inadvertently brought down a criminal empire. In the weeks that followed, the climate in Pine Valley had entirely shifted. The affluent suburb was no longer a hunting ground for predatory cops. The new interim chief had instituted strict body cam audits, eliminated all quota-based traffic enforcement, and dismantled the slush fund, returning the stolen money to community programs across the county. It was a crisp Friday evening. Elena was driving her Chevy Malibu down Pine Valley Road, heading home from another long shift at Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital. She kept her speed exactly at the limit. In her rearview mirror, she saw the glow of police headlights approaching. Her heart gave a momentary instinctual flutter of anxiety. The cruiser pulled up into the lane next to her as they both stopped at a red light. Elena looked over. The officer in the driver's seat, a young woman in a crisp uniform, rolled down her window. Elena cautiously rolled hers down. The officer didn't scowl. She smiled warmly. "Evening, Mrs. Harper. Thank you for your shift at the hospital tonight. Drive safe getting home." "Thank you, officer." Elena smiled back, the heavy weight of the past month finally evaporating into the cool night air. The light turned green. The cruiser pulled ahead, and Elena drove the rest of the way home in absolute peace. She pulled into her driveway, where Julian was waiting on the porch, a fresh pitcher of sweet tea in his hand. She walked up the steps completely unafraid of the shadows, knowing that as long as there were people willing to stand up against the darkness, the light would always win. When those corrupt officers pulled over a senior pediatric nurse, they thought they held all the power. They never imagined her son would dismantle their entire criminal empire without firing a single shot. Julian proved that true strength isn't about abusing authority. It's about protecting the vulnerable. If Elena's incredible story of justice inspired you, hit that like button right now. Share this video to expose corruption and show the world that nobody is above the law. Don't forget to subscribe for more intense real-life stories of justice served. What would you do for your mother? Drop a comment below.